We stand for the true and north, the cities and skylines, the strong and free. For those who value the story and source, the opinion and fact, the context and clarity to help illuminate the path and potential, the drive and direction. We are the one and only, the Globe and Mail. What shapes your world?
Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge Toronto is on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples.
Please welcome to the stage President and CEO of the Globe and Mail, Andrew Saunders.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I love the energy. I'd like to officially take this opportunity of welcoming you all to today's event, Canada's Technology $100 Million Club event. Truthfully, it's pretty impressive to be able to see a room full of dynamic leaders that are effectively the ones that are really going to be shaping our economy moving forward. I think for more than 182 years, we've been around for 182 years, the Globe's been reporting stories and ideas that have helped define the country. Pretty much, especially focusing on areas like business, policy, innovation, and growth. And today is really just an extension of that in many ways. I think what's interesting, I hope you got a bit of a glimpse of the video, but we just launched a brand new brand campaign. But the premise is around one simple question. I think it's a pretty powerful question, which is, what shapes your world at the end of the day? It's a question we ask ourselves that every day. It's a question that we ask that of our readers every day. And clearly it's critical that we keep ahead of it so we can keep an informed society. I think what's inspiring, though, is when I look around the room, clearly there are many players today that are the ones that really will be shaping our world moving forward. You're the ones that are obviously setting the pace in your respective industries. And really, we all do appreciate and respect how difficult and how challenging it is to both build and scale businesses in Canada. Too often, strong companies, may sell early, they may move to larger markets, or they can struggle to break through that critical growth stage that everybody faces. And I think it's important to be able to acknowledge with all the success and the successful companies that we have here today in building your own businesses, a couple of things that we have to remind ourselves of. First of all, you also are building greater resilience into the Canadian economy by doing so. And you're creating, I think, real bench strength, one could argue, for the long-term economic success of the country. I do think it's this type of, ambition and success that's needed in Canada in order for us to address the big issues that we're dealing with around productivity and competitiveness. But it's also great to see many of the players here today are not just succeeding on a domestic level, they're succeeding on a global stage as well. But I think what surprises me a little is even with all that success and having these organizations obviously define and lead their respective industries, many sometimes aren't fully widely understood to the degree that they need to be. Or at least they haven't received the level of recognition that they ultimately deserve, either by investors, or by policymakers, or by the larger business community. I think that's one of the reasons why we are here today. Ultimately, I think Sean, who you'll be hearing from quite soon, I think has done a wonderful job of trying to track and help bring a little bit of visibility to the level of success that you will bring to the market. But I think we wanted to do more than that, I suppose, and really focus on trying to accelerate the level of success of what you do across the country. We feel we can do that by obviously profiling organizations that are driving this level of growth, by helping investors better understand where new opportunities exist, or by creating forums like today, right, where you can have some dialogue and discourse in order to encourage the highest levels of innovation and investment. So we all know that reaching the stage that you're at and the level that you're playing at doesn't come by just from a good idea. A lot relies on the environment that you operate in. If it has to do with policy or capital or technology or the value chain or attracting the right level of talent to be able to thrive and win. However, the flip side of it is, I think, especially with the size of Canada, I think there's a limited amount of peers within your level. So, having an environment where you can have a community like we have today, where you can kind of come together, share ideas, and really focus on, strengthening the larger ecosystem doesn't happen very often. But I suppose that's why we obviously are very fortunate to have organizations like RBCX, Deloitte, the Mars Discovery District, that are all really focused, I think, on helping build that level of community and connectivity. So in the spirit of that level of collaboration, that's what's kind of allowed us to kind of create and establish today's event. So I do want to thank, obviously, the sponsors of today, both RBCX, Deloitte, and Mars, for supporting today's event, and probably more importantly, for playing an important role to helping companies grow and scale their businesses day in, day out. So hopefully today, you'll have a chance to effectively, share what's worked, share what hasn't worked, identify, I think, clear areas of change that's required to continue to grow faster and drive more profitability. From my perspective, more importantly, to keep Canadian companies of your stature and of your success kind of in Canada. Although these are complex issues to address, I think it really does matter at the end of the day, because if we can get these right, we can have a more profitable and prosperous country at large. And these type of conversations effectively kind of help, I think, move that agenda along. So without that, I'd like to introduce Sean Silkoff up onto the stage. He's our technology and life science reporter, and I think you hopefully read him every day, every week. He's one of the Canada's loudest leading voice in championing, I think, innovation and growth in the country. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and hello and welcome, everyone, and to those of you who are watching online as well. As Andrew mentioned, I'm Sean Silkoff, Tech and Life Sciences reporter with the Globe and Mail. Pleased to be your host and MC, along with my colleague April Fong, who will be on stage shortly. So, I've covered the Canadian tech scene since I joined the Globe 14 years ago. Things were pretty moribund back then. Nortel was gone, BlackBerry was on the decline, and tech made up a dismal 1.6% of the S&P TSX Composite Index. Canadian tech companies were small, underfunded, and prone to foreign takeovers at bargain prices. Venture capitalists were asking for help from Ottawa. Shopify was still a relatively small company holed up on the wrong side of Ottawa's byward market. But something interesting was happening. It was much easier to start a tech company than ever before. New opportunities had opened up everywhere, thanks to the explosion of mobile data communications, cloud computing, and before long, artificial intelligence. And it was evident Canada would have its share of winners. That's how I convinced my editors to let me write about this. By the 2020s, it was evident that this had come to pass. 2 years ago, I started to compile a list of companies that had reached the 100 million USD revenue mark, which is a mark of maturity and enduring success. Tech people in the room would know that we call those companies centaurs. I thought the list would maybe top out at 20 or 30 names. But when we published it for the first time in December 2024, it contained 71 companies. And when we did the list again a year later, 4.5 months ago, it contained 77 companies. And pretty sure there's going to be more when we do it again this year. The $100 million Club features some of Canada's best-known tech brands. Jane Software, 1Password, Wealthsimple, Questrade, Hopper, and if you're a lawyer, Clio. This year's list will feature a company that didn't even exist in 2021 called Hive. You'll meet one of the founders today, plus 5 other $100 million Club member CEOs. So for Canada, this is a new class of technology companies, startups that grew up. Scale-ups that are profitable, well-funded, in some cases worth billions of dollars. Several are active acquirers. Collectively, they employ tens of thousands of people. I actually haven't counted the number. It's probably higher than that now. Many of these companies are thinking about going public also in the coming years. And if they do, it would be a much different tech IPO wave than we've seen in Canada before, with far more mature, sophisticated, profitable, and valuable companies coming to market. Now, because they're private, it might be hard to get a sense of just how big they are. So I want you to look at the screen. Folks, if you could put up that first slide. So This is what the list of the top 10 most valuable Canadian tech companies on the TSX looks like today. But if you put on top of that companies that are private and the valuation at which they last raised, here's what we would be looking at. If you can show the second slide, please. Look at that. Isn't that something? As you can see, their arrival on Canada's public markets, even some of them, would have a transformative impact. Their successes are already playing a big role in Canada's economic growth story. Without further ado, I'd like to hand things off to April.
Thank you, Sean, and hello, everyone. As Sean mentioned, I'm April Fong, Deputy Personal Finance Editor with the Globe and Mail. I've been a business and tech journalist for quite a while, and I've recently joined the personal finance team, and so I'm really thrilled to moderate the next discussion, an intersection of personal finances and tech. We're going to have a fireside chat with one of Canada's most notable fintech entrepreneurs who will share how he executed on his long-term vision to help people achieve financial freedom. Please welcome to the stage Michael Ketchen, CEO and co-founder of Wealthsimple.
Hi.
Thanks for being here today, Michael. Let's start with your vision and your strategy and get right down to it. When you first started Wealthsimple, what was the long-term vision you were anchored to, and how consciously were you trying to build something with staying power rather than look for a fast exit?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, and this caps a second event of great weeks around entrepreneurship in Canada. I was at another wonderful startup event just last night, and I was remarking that 10 years ago, similar to what Sean was saying, you might be able to fill a room like this for Canadian tech, but the quality of the companies was just not there. It's kind of a sad, place to be, and I just think it's so cool when you see that list of actually scaling high-quality, world-class companies. Here we have in Canada, and something to be proud of and hopeful for around the future. So, well done, Canada. Let's go. There was never a grand plan for Wealthsimple. I had the good fortune of falling in love with investing at a young age. My sister entered me into a stock picking contest at 12 years old. I went on to win it. It came with a grand prize ski vacation for two to Whistler, BC. So at 12 years old, I took my dad skiing for a week, fell in love with investing. I thought I was the coolest 12-year-old kid around.
That is pretty cool.
Thank you. I peaked early. And I never pursued investing or finance professionally. I got my career started in consulting, and then I moved to California where I was part of a startup. We were fortunate. We built this business. We sold it. It was a pretty modest outcome. But for the first time in our lives, the team I was working with had a little money and they wanted to invest. And they knew I liked to invest, so they came to me for help. And that was the initial inspiration for Wealthsimple, which was watching them try to get started, try to open up an investment account, try to be smart about what to do with their money. It was just obviously too complicated. It was too expensive. It was too difficult. And we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could use great software and great design to help humanize this experience, make it feel accessible and empowering, make it feel lower cost, and help people actually on the road to financial freedom. And so it was, can I solve this problem for a few of my friends? And then it was, can I solve it for my mom and my parents? And now, 4 million clients or so later, still very much on that journey of, can we keep taking friction out of doing smart things with your money? Can we bring more and more financial experiences to clients that empower them towards the future? And we're far from done on that journey.
And on the part of my question about, were you looking for a fast exit, or did you want to build a company with staying power? What do you have to say about that?
So I very clearly remember it was the day we launched the company. We had 0 clients, okay? 0. I remember you can imagine what it was like in those early days. I'd go around, I'd tell people, we're building this great company to make investing simpler, more accessible. And people are like, oh, that sounds so interesting. And their question would be, well, how many assets do you manage? And my question would be, well, how much are you planning to invest? No one wants to be the first money in a financial services business. So we were literally 0. And one of my investors turned to me and said, "What are we doing here, Mike? What's the ambition?" And I said, "Well, Vanguard, which is one of the companies I most respect on the planet, has been around at that point, call it 30 years. It took them 25 years to get to their first $1 trillion. Today they have about 10. BlackRock, was around for 25 years, and it took them 20 years to get to their first trillion. Today they have even more than that. I said the next company to get to $1 trillion will do it in 15 years or less. Let's go build that business. And let's go do that from Canada." And I remember everybody looking at me when we had $0 and 0 clients and saying, "Okay, that's cute." But I think that's always been the ambition, is how do we build something that reshapes the landscape of financial services, does it in a way that builds trust authentically with clients, and is in it for the long term.
A big theme today on startups that grew up will be around staying power. What do you think was the key ingredient for Wealthsimple in terms of having staying power, being able to build here and scale?
Well, I think it's for any company, there's a dogged resourcefulness that's required. When we started, the prevailing comment was, "That's a really nice idea, it's never going to work. Because Mike, you're 25 years old, you've never worked in this industry, and that's cute, but you really have no idea what you're doing." And B, the banks are so big and so controlling that there's an oligopoly, they have a monopoly on trust. So even though you've got a great idea, Canadians won't go for it. And I think it's taken, to your point of staying power, a decade and still every day trying to earn the trust of our clients and never taking that for granted and just solving one challenge after the other. So in the early days, no one believed in it until I found one angel investor in SomSafe who got the vision immediately, was willing to put the first check in to help us get our start. And as we built the business, this is a common story, is that one person who believed in you. But what you don't hear is like how many people said no before you got to that one person. So we got that first check, we got started, and then we built for a couple of years, and then we had to find our next round of capital to keep scaling, and no one believed in us. Venture capital said Canada is a write-off, it's too small. What you're doing is again, your competitors are too big and too powerful, until we found Power Corp. And this amazing entrepreneurial, next generation leader in Paul Demery III, who believed in what we were doing. And after a million no's from everybody else, kind of saw the vision and bet on what we were doing. And I think that's what it takes, is kind of finding the believers, the resourcefulness and resilience to keep on building. And I think what's amazing about the Canadian ecosystem today is just how much deeper it is. There are so many, investors now and entrepreneurs now that it's a very different place than it was 10 years ago.
We have more believers, you think?
Lots more. Doesn't necessarily mean it's any easier. A lot of respect for the entrepreneurs that kind of are in the ring and trying to build companies, but definitely a lot more players, which is good.
Yeah, it's tough out there. You've done all of this, built Wealthsimple without a Schedule I banking license. Do you think you'll need to get one eventually?
Perhaps. I think that our view is we love to partner with others in the ecosystem to bring the best of the services we offer to our clients. And that might very well be something we pursue in the future, but we have no plans to become a bank anytime soon.
As you mentioned, you've spent some time in Silicon Valley before launching Wealthsimple, but you chose to build here. What did you learn there that you brought back, and what made you confident that Canada was the right place to build this company?
Honestly, it was a personal choice to be here. I'm not sure it was the business case that said I should build building in Canada. I am a proud Canadian. I grew up here. My family is here. And so when it came time to choose, do I keep going in San Francisco and build a business there or come back? And I think you build a business, you kind of think in decades long terms. Do I want to be here for another 10 years building something or be back at home? And it became obvious that I wanted to be part of whatever was brewing in the Canadian ecosystem. I care a lot about this. I really have a hard time with a lot of armchair critics that sit outside industries and comment about all the problems with them. I'm someone who believes if you have a problem with something, you do your best to try and be part of the solution. And so in this case, I felt like I really wanted to be part of the Canadian ecosystem and try and build a company here. And we've taken that even further. We just launched this great new business a couple years ago called Simple Ventures, just trying to take that even further, which is trying to build 3 to 5 new Canadian companies every year on the thesis that people still think Canada is too small a market, and so they ignore us. And Canadians miss out. And wouldn't it be great if we had more and more great Canadian companies tackling problems for everyday Canadians? So it's a theme I care a lot about, and I think that's what drove me back.
Yeah, you want to bring what you're seeing, the best in the world, to Canada. On that note, what about expansion outside of Canada for Wealthsimple? You tried in the US, you left the UK in 2021. Would you try it again?
Our ambitions are bigger than the Canadian market, for sure, but we are 100% focused right now on building the largest financial institution in Canada and changing this industry forever. You know, it's remarkable the traction that we have achieved here, but we are really just getting started. You know, we started as an investment company with a long-term wealth management capability, then we launched a trading business. A big new focus for us has been our banking business, which is quickly becoming, you know, the fastest growing part of the company. And we just launched last week a small business banking capability. So we feel like it is still the very early innings of reshaping financial services in Canada. And that's going to require 120% of our time and attention for now.
You surpassed your goal of $100 billion in assets with the help of maybe surge in popularity in DIY investing and more Canadians wanting to take control over their retirement and savings. You've also said that going public remains a destination for Wealthsimple. How has that surge in assets affected your plans around and your thinking around an IPO?
I don't think it changes our plans at all. I think a lot of companies think about an IPO as the finish line or as some moment that is kind of something you plan for. The more important thing is learning how to run a company that can be public forever. And that is the destination we want for Wealthsimple, because our view is we want to build the most trusted brand in the country, and that being public would help turn our clients into shareholders, enable people to kind of be part of the Wealthsimple story, and build the kind of credibility and trust behind the company in the long term. But to do that well, you got to be a business that's ready to be public forever, and we'll do that when it's the right time for us.
When would the right time be for you?
Stay tuned.
I had to ask.
Yeah, the truth is we're in no rush. I think the business could be public today, but we will do it when the time is right and it makes sense for our business, our clients, our team. Okay.
Your last funding round, Wealthsimple, became one of the few Canadian tech firms to reach a $10 billion valuation. You attracted major global investors, including Dragoneer, Singapore's sovereign wealth fund, GIC. But you're remaining a Canadian company serving Canadians, although more to come, as you noted before. Can you tell us about how your conversations with investors have evolved over time and how you were able to crack, getting investment and believers from world-class investors like those that I just mentioned?
Yeah. We were really excited about the round last year for a number of reasons. One is it kind of really helped us put the company in a position where we could be even more ambitious and aggressive in the platform that we're trying to build and the service we're trying to deliver for Canadians. And we welcome these incredible world-class investors who have seen the best businesses around the world get built. I mean, Dragoneer was joking with me that they only really do 2 investments a year, and I think last year they did OpenAI and Wealthsimple. And that was humbling for us because I think it spoke to the uniqueness of what we are doing on a global stage. We added about 40 billion or so, 50 billion is kind of what our AUA went from 50 billion to 100 billion last year. There are not many other companies in the world that are growing at that scale. And when you Canadianize that number, it speaks to just how much penetration we have managed to build within the Canadian market. As you said, I think about, if you look at the FHSA as a great example, this is this new investment account for first-time home buyers that was created just a few years ago. Something like 35% of all FHSAs that have been created in Canada have been created with Wealthsimple. And so it's a remarkable share of when you think about when a Canadian is opening up their next investment account or choosing where to trust with their next dollar of savings, Wealthsimple is capturing an enormous share of that kind of flow in the market. And I think they saw that, and they thought about what can that turn into over time when you build a platform that is really in its foundation built on trust And Wealthsimple is now, I think the Globe reported on it, last year or 2 years ago, the most trusted financial brand in the country for people under 40 years old. And we think that's pretty special and pretty unique. And we think that that can compound into something really huge over time.
Over time, I want to talk about what's next for Wealthsimple. The Globe's Mira Rahman broke the story last week that Wealthsimple is working on bringing prediction markets trading to as part of your suite of services. It's early days, but what can you tell us about those plans, and how does it fit in with your vision for the long-term vision of the company and some of the other newer products that you've been announcing, such as access to private markets, home cash delivery, for example?
I mean, we view ourselves as Canada's leading financial innovator. And so our job is to bring the products that our clients want and do it in a way that is consistent with the regulatory framework and provide a safe and trusted way for Canadians to access those products. And so event contracts, which is something we just got approval for, as you noted last week, is a massively fast-growing industry around the world. And we think one that has really interesting applications. We're not really prepared to go into much detail about it today, other than we're really excited that we've worked closely with the regulators on what is a safe framework to launch this sort of service in Canada. And we'll have more details coming out soon about how we intend to bring that to market.
For years, you've talked about the goal of reaching $100 billion in assets. You reached that, and faster than you had expected and set out to do. What is your next goal? And how much harder will it be to get to that and to continue innovating than for the first $100 billion in assets goal?
I mean, we're certainly not slowing down. Our eyes are set on $1 trillion. That's obviously the next step from where we are now. But the way we do that is the formula that we've been focused on, is how do you create more value every day for Canadians? When I think about what that means, last year, we saved Canadians that were on Wealthsimple $1.5 billion in fees they would have paid in commissions, and then the interest that's paid out on our high interest checking account. That's like writing your clients $1.5 billion check that they wouldn't have gotten if they had had their money on another platform. It is a remarkably big number. And what I'm excited about as you scale is that number grows too. And that is dollars directly back in Canadians' pockets that is going to fund their long-term financial futures, their ability to take their families on vacation, their abilities to buy that home that they dreamed about. And I think if we stay focused on that formula, more and more people will trust Wealthsimple with more and more of their financial lives. That's what we've seen over the last 10 years, and it's snowballing. It takes time to build trust. And I think we've been remarkably excited about just how fast that compounding machine is building, and we see it not slowing down for a long time.
I think it'd be useful for the audience maybe to get some free advice from you. AI will be a big topic in many of the conversations this afternoon. If you were starting from scratch today, Wealthsimple's not in the picture, and you now have AI with you as a technology, as an enabler, what would you focus on? What would you build?
I mean, I think the cool part about that answer is whatever you want. I mean, the number of entrepreneurs I've met over the last decade plus of building companies that have come to me and said, "Oh, Mike, I've got a great idea. I just need that technical co-founder to start." And I don't think I've ever heard from them again, because they get stuck at that starting point and they're never able to take that first step. That problem is going away. And so my advice is people need to become proficient at using these tools. They are a superpower, and they give anybody the ability to build things. Even if that's not the perfectly at scale end product of what you build, you can get so far on testing a product, building a first version of it, and these tools are only getting better. So I think we are living in the golden age of entrepreneurship. And for people that have been excited about building things, there has never been an easier time to do it. And I think for all of us that work in companies or run companies, it also necessitates thinking about how are we equipping our teams to thrive in this new world? Because the bar has changed. The expectations of what is required to do your job is changing. And we've been working on all sorts of really interesting things. I mean, we're trying to upskill our team and are working really hard at driving kind of training and new tooling and having remarkable success with that. But we also launched a couple really interesting programs. One we called Launchpad, where we asked a number of high school grads to forego going to college and instead come work with us. And we had an unbelievable response to it. Actually hired our first 4 or 6 months ago. Several are deciding to, I think, defer college indefinitely and stay in the working world. One of them just resigned because he's going to start a new business and just got accepted to like one of the world's preeminent accelerators. So we're thrilled about kind of how that program has gone. We also launched this thing called AI Builders, where it's this whole new way to hire talent where you don't actually have to have any college requirement, any resume. The application is use AI to build something, and that's the application. And we ended up already hiring 5 people out of this. We had 1,200 people apply in like 48 hours or something.
Wow.
And so the world of talent is changing. It is, I think, an incredible opportunity for anybody who embraces these new tools. And Canada needs to be on the forefront of it because there is a risk that if you don't lean in here, we as a country might risk falling behind.
To round out our conversation, you talk a lot about the importance of naive ambition. Can you tell us about that, your meaning behind it, and how it can help companies change the trajectory of their growth?
This idea of naive ambition is a core value at Wealthsimple. I think it started in that story of $1 trillion in 15 years. And really what it comes down to is, I find when most people hear a new idea for the first time, their initial reaction is to list 100 reasons it will never work. And instead, we choose to flip that on its head and ask, what would you have to believe for this to be true? And it's a much more empowering way to go about your daily life, is the optimistic case of, can you see a path to this working out? And you'll find it totally changes the dynamics of how you approach conversations. It makes people think bigger. And we find it's a heck of a lot more fun to operate that way.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Michael, for your candor and your sharing your inspiring vision. Let's give a round of applause to Michael.
Okay, thanks again to Michael and to April for the great interview. So next up, we're going to hear from some more stars in Canada's $100 million tech club. Look at all that revenue on stage. Hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue right there. So pleased to have this opportunity to showcase some of the nation's boldest and most tenacious founders and CEOs. I'll introduce them. Let's put up your hand as I introduce you. Alok Ajmera, CEO of Profix. Sarah Huggins, co-founder and Chief Operating Officer at Hive, and I have to say, owner of Mary B Restaurant as well, where I ate last night on St. Clair. It's good. Jack Newton, co-founder and CEO of Clio. Anna Sainsbury, Executive Chair and co-founder of GeoComply. And finally, Allison Taylor, co-founder and co-CEO of Jane App. All right. So I want to start by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and your companies. It's like a pageant for everyone here. How and why did you start your companies? What problem were you trying to solve? How did you get here? And what's the journey to 100 million been like? Go down the line. Alok?
Yeah, great. Thank you for everyone for attending. Thank you for inviting me. I don't usually come to these events or these type of events. I'm kind of a heads down, grind, build type of person. Sean caught me on the right day, twisted my arm, got me to say yes. Look, at the end of the day, when I go to a party, by the way, people don't want to talk to me. They talk to my wife. She's a podcaster. She's so much more exciting. She's in media. When they ask me what I do, I tell them the truth, which is I build software for accountants. And that usually ends the conversation. Many years ago, we were kind of working in the corporate finance world. So CFOs, controllers, VP of FP&A, any accountants in the room? I apologize in advance. These jokes might offend you. But we realize is that there's really complicated workflows that are going on that are extraordinarily important to the functioning of a business. And at the board level, everything is really crisp and polished, and CFOs are kind of like the duck analogy. They're very calm. But under the water, it's like chaos. It is manual processes. It's Excel. It's bubblegum. It's duct tape. It's numbers that don't tie. And I'm not talking about small startups. These are like billion-dollar companies that have like extraordinarily archaic processes. And it's hard. It's because given a choice, a founder, and most of you probably fall into this category, It's like, would you give your CFO $1 to invest, or would you put it into engineering, or would you put it into product, or would you put it into go-to-market? And universally, every single person answers they will never give it to the CFO to invest in back office. And as a result, we found this like extraordinarily interesting opportunity, very specific to the mid-market. There's hundreds of thousands of companies out there that have chaotic infrastructure in their back office. And we kind of carved out a little niche in that world. We found that if you really focus on like innovating, building great technology, solving real problems that actually help people, people will pay for it, and they will continue to pay for it. And so we've been on this journey. I've been the CEO of Profix for many years, at Profix for 20-something years. And when you zoom out, it's this like extraordinary growth trajectory. I always joke we're on the Canadian Tim Hortons plan, double. But when you zoom in, it's like this like chaotic, up and down, like painful, 2 quarters up, 3 quarters down, 2 quarters up, etc. But net, when you zoom out, it's been this like amazing straight line journey from the bottom to the top right. There's my time. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Huggins. I'm the COO and co-founder of a company called Hive. What do? I'm going to paint a picture for you. If you want to sell stock or buy stock in a public company, it's pretty simple, right? It takes a few minutes. You can do it on your computer, on your phone. Maybe you can do it on Wealthsimple. But if you want to sell stock in a private company, so think about early employees of companies like Stripe, or institutional investors in companies like Anthropic or SpaceX, historically, there's no exchange for that. There's no brokerage accounts. There's no market. There's no pricing, no transparency, no available counterparty for your trade. But even if you find one, a counterparty, there is no machinery like there is in the public markets for executing and settling your trades. This isn't just a problem for investors, it's a problem for companies too. Companies are staying private longer. We're all proof of that, or these guys are proof. I haven't been around for very long. And they face the challenge. Liquidity is an increasingly important asset, and yet many of them lack the governance and infrastructure that they need to enable it. And so, as you've probably guessed, that's where we come in. That's where Hive comes in. Hive is a global liquidity platform for private companies and their shareholders. We work with private issuers to build and manage liquidity programs, so things like ad hoc secondary trading markets for their stock, or structured processes like tender offers. And we create a centralized venue for institutional investors to discover pricing for their assets, transact, and settle their trades. How do we get started? My co-founder and better half, Sim Desai, was a broker in this market for some 14 years. He saw firsthand how fragmented, inefficient, and opaque it was, and he sort of looked at me and said, hey, I think, like every tech entrepreneur before him, he said, I think there's a better way, and do you want to build it? And I said, sure, I guess so. We recruited our co-founders, Stuart Eccles, Prab Ratan, and we bootstrapped it with our own capital. And we launched it in May 2022, I think, into the worst private market in a decade, as luck would have it. We all have those stories. Capital had dried up. The market had dried up. Private capital was scarce, but we figured if we can do it in this market, then we can do it. And we did. Our bet has paid off. So since inception, we have facilitated over $4 billion in transactions in some of the most innovative companies on the planet. We have over $1 billion US in assets under management. We have about 300 million of liquidity going through our platform every month now. And 95% of tier one venture capital firms in the United States have traded and worked with Hive. We go up against some small guys like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and Charles Schwab, and it's very un-Canadian of me to say this, but I do think we are winning. And we're doing that from Vancouver with an incredible team of 170 people. So the future is bright, I think, for us. I'm biased, I guess, but you have to have that sort of naive ambition and optimism, as Michael talked about. The private market is estimated to be some sort of $12 to $15 trillion in assets. and growing. Companies are staying private longer, and everyone from employees to institutional investors, LPs, and funds is going to be looking for liquidity. 5 years ago, the infrastructure for this barely existed. We're building it in Canada, but for the whole world, and we're just getting started. So thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be building what I hope is an iconic company in this great country.
Wow, thank you. Jack.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Newton. I'm the founder and CEO of Clio. Clio is AI and SaaS platform for lawyers. Maybe I'll start out with just some of the headline numbers. Our platform supports over 400,000 legal professionals around the world. We operate in over 130 countries. We are over, 400 million of annual recurring revenue and have 2,000 employees, including 500 here in Toronto, which recently became our largest office. The story for Clio, we launched the company back in 2008 as the cloud was starting to emerge as a revolutionary computing platform, and my co-founder Ryan Govro and I looked at legal and really saw legal as one of the last major industries to be fundamentally transformed by technology, and felt like the cloud would be an enabling technology to help drive that transformation. And we got started focusing on solos and small firms, got some great initial traction, and over the course of the last 18 years have built Clio into what is now the most widely used legal technology platform in the world. We started the company in maybe what was the only worst time in the last 25 years than when Sarah founded her company, which was in 2008 in the midst of the global financial crisis. But I think it helped embed some scrappiness in our DNA that lasts to this day. And over the course of the last year, we've been undertaking the most dramatic transformation we've ever seen in Clio's 18-year history, which is evolving from a SaaS platform to an AI-first platform. To catalyze that transformation, we made a huge acquisition by legal technology standards and a huge acquisition by Canadian standards. I think it was the largest private company acquisition in Canadian history when we acquired a company called Vlex for $1 billion US. Clio's about a $5 billion market cap today, so in USD, so that's obviously a pretty big swing. But what that brings to the table for us is a vast amount of legal content, including primary case law, that we can use to fuel our AI platform. And what Clio's doing today is marrying the business of law, and the practice of law in one platform, really fundamentally powered by and driven by AI. And as a result, our competitive landscape has really evolved in a significant way where in some ways we're competing with some of the incumbents in this space like Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis. We're competing with new AI native startups like Harvey and Lagora. And we have our legacy practice management competitors as well. So we've got a vastly expanded aperture in terms of our market opportunity and our TAM, which is really now the $1 trillion of legal spend that is undertaken every year around the world, but also a much wider set of competitors chasing after that opportunity. So that's Clio in a nutshell.
Thanks, Jack. Anna.
Firstly, thank you so much for having me. I'm sure, like all the other panelists here, we find you very charming in how you approach the technology space and that you're an advocate for tech, especially in Canada. So it's great to have you reporting and keeping us on our toes. I, like many of the other panelists, solved a very sexy problem, which is fraud and compliance, which everybody enjoys talking about at parties. So you can just come to my parties if that would help you socially. So yeah, what is that? Why does it matter? Essentially, when we look at how we can stop fraud and what compliance can mean online, for us, we bridge that gap between who you are and where you are. And our first use case was the US gaming market, where they wanted to start taking bets online. That's the sports betting, lottery, online casino, that really kind of boomed in the US primarily from 2012 onwards, and then in Ontario more recently. And in the US, it's a federal felony to place a bet across state lines. And that wasn't just a law that was written down, which I think we see many, but it was a law that was enforced where executives were put in jail and planes were taken down and people were arrested at airports. And so there was an initiative in this market, not just to have a checkbox exercise, but to really know that they could have a scalable, accurate, gold-level compliance solution that was going to solve their problems. Our only challenge was that in 2012, accurate geolocation wasn't available. And so the legislation and regulations demands were a little further ahead than where technology was. And so we took it upon ourselves to pull that together, to find a way to get all of the location data, no matter what device you're on, which isn't actually the hard part. The hard part is thinking like a criminal and thinking about all the ways they're going to obfuscate where they are, so you can be in Miramar in a criminal activity group that is human trafficking and approaching banks and taking over our accounts, which are some of the challenges we're solving today. And so we solved that problem for the US gaming market. That was our big one. We gained enough confidence to be invited to testify at federal and state hearings, which allowed us to get our names out there in the minds of regulators and legislators that were implementing laws and wanted to build trust in their industries. And that was really kind of the billion-dollar problem that we solved. In 2012, that took us until about 2016 when we saw a total lack of growth. Like, I think everybody has their ups and downs, and we thought, how are we going to continue to sustain ourselves? The market was still quite small, but there were rumors that people were going to start watching TV and content online at that time, and there was a company called Netflix that was upsetting some of the big studios in Hollywood as they were going to be a big competitor. But in order to buy digital rights and sell digital rights in different jurisdictions, they also needed to have these virtual fences. And so there we were with a overly compliant geolocation solution to service this growing market, and we did nail that. It's what we would call like a simple solution, really identifying if someone's hiding behind a virtual network and then stopping that. And as we know, fraudsters are always innovative, so the more online banking we have, the more digital credit card transactions, the fact that 80% of North Americans' data has been leaked on the dark web allows your data to be purchased for $10 and replicated. And so we work with our customers to stop those types of problems.
Wow, thanks. And Allison, one time zone away from me. Let's hear the Jane story.
Hi, I'm Allie Taylor. I'm co-founder, co-CEO of Jane App, which is what most people call it, even though we didn't mean for that to happen. Whatever URL you choose is what your customers are going to call you, is a secret that you should know if you're starting a business. So we call ourselves Jane. Other people call us Jane App. We are a practice management software for small healthcare practices. So that's physio, massage, chiro, naturopath. We actually have 3, I'm calling them super buckets, types of customers that use Jane. The first is mental health. So actually, I think we're the most widely used practice management software for counselors across all of Canada. Then there's the manual therapy. So that's your physio, massage, people that touch your body in the loveliest way. Which, that's going to be the quote that now goes everywhere. I'm going to be like, Allie likes it when they touch your bodies in delightful ways. Please don't use that. And then medical is the last one. And this is something that's really exciting for me as we're moving into nurse practitioners that are able, I don't know if you know this, but nurse practitioners are going to be able to bill the provincial healthcare system and become primary care providers just as their standalone businesses. That just actually creates an entire industry that didn't exist before, which is nurse practitioner-owned businesses. Super excited about where the medical part of our customer base is going and how they're growing. So it started because I opened a practice in 2011. I was having my 3rd child and opening a clinic, which I think goes to part of that like naivete of founders thinking that everything is possible. I don't know why we all think that, but there's something missing in our brains, which is helpful. And it was a multidisciplinary practice, so physio, chiro, massage, also from Vancouver. And there was nothing that would work for my practice. I really needed online booking. This was in 2011, right? So this is when there was kind of a shift from the on-prem software, but the medical world was still very much in that space. So nothing really connected to the internet. So your options were, I think we had appointment.com was the only option I could find. And it would sort of it would load the page, but it was like half the page didn't load, like only CSS was loading. It was just a terrible experience. And I was spending a lot of money on my clinic and on my website and just trying to create this great experience for my patients. And so my co-founder, Trevor, he had a marketing agency that was working with me on my branding. And so I just kept complaining and showing him my options and being like, I can't use this. This is going to be terrible. This remains my product strategy to this day. Just showing him terrible things and being like, please fix this. And so he was like, well, let's just build something into your website. So the original version of Jane, I was just solving my own problem. And on reflection, I'm like, if there'd been something available, I would have just bought it. We didn't mean to start a company. It really was just solving a problem. And so they built that electronic medical records as well. There was nothing that was available for more than one discipline. Everything was very discipline specific. So we created something for my practice, and then I just used it for a couple of years. And in that time, people saw the online booking and were like, what's this? Can we use it too? That was 100% of our market research. 6 people wanted it. And we're like, great, let's do this. And so he sent me an email like 2 years later and was like, hey, do you want to turn this into something that we can sell to other people? And I, at the time, I was looking at franchising my practice. And so I was like, well, let's do that. And so we started building it. We launched in BC, like really just thinking it was going to be a side hustle. Like we just thought we'd keep doing our businesses and we'd have this side hustle. So we launched in BC to physio massage chiro. And then it just sort of took off. There was obviously a hole in the market that needed to be filled. And so we started selling across Canada. And then acupuncture and chiro pulled us into the US. And so now we're around the world. We have 800 staff, mostly in Canada. We're about to hit 500 million appointments booked on the platform. So that's 500 million healthcare appointments happening through the platform. We don't employ the therapists. They're using us as a tool to run their own businesses. And we also have a UK team. And like Jack, software has no borders. So basically, you're in countries all around the world, which is kind of a cool thing about being a SaaS product. I think that's it. That's me.
Wow. Think about that. From modest beginnings and not necessarily having the intention to go and conquer the world, you've all hit very impressive levels. I'm going to throw a handful of questions to all of you for the rest of our time. You don't all have to answer, but if you want, I'll start with someone and then shoot your hand up if you want to sort of dive in afterward. The one I want to ask is, probably people in the audience are wondering, how many of you are planning to go public, think you might go public, or want to go to public one day? Put your hand up. That's it. Okay, so Jack, you start us off.
I didn't realize that'd be the only hand. Could I put it back down?
Actually, I'm going to go to Ali. Ali, you and I have talked over the years. Is it and maybe for the rest of you, is it a definitely no or is it a maybe? Because there's probably stages in your time running your company where you say, we could never do that or be that. And then you reach those levels. Why don't you start, Allison? Tell us, Ali, about why not and what could change your mind?
So I came into this world not really knowing anything about the tech world. And so I always ask people, I don't understand, why do people IPO? I just don't get it. Because we've been scaling in a time where the private market has been very friendly to us. It's not been hard to find investors. And so I was like, what is the purpose? Why do people want to go public? And it seems like there's only 2 reasons. One, you need a big influx of cash, which I actually think you can find other ways of doing that without IPOing if you need cash to grow your business. And the other is you've reached a threshold where your current investors need an exit and there's no one else who can buy because you're just too big. But I think that's just changed over the last 10 years. Investors have been more willing to stay into the private markets at a larger scale. And same with getting cash. I'm like, so if those aren't reasons to do it, then why would you? So I think the only thing that I find interesting about it is people, our customers and patients, they do say, how do we buy into Jane? And I'm like, oh, sorry, you can't. You just can't. It's not a thing we allow. So like a direct listing where your users could become your owners, or there's like sort of a nice story to that. But unless, I just think you'd have to have a really good reason. Like, it's a lot of work to IPO, and then you're running a business in a totally different way. It's your team is very distracted by how much your shares are worth. You're constantly worried about just like, who knows what's going to happen that's going to shift and distract everybody on your team. I think private just lets you stay really focused. And so, I don't know, unless there's a good reason. Jack's going to tell us his reason.
Let's hear the bull case. Yeah, Jack.
My thought has been, I don't disagree with anything that you said, Alison. I do think this idea of, I think ideally the right place for anyone wanting to build a long-term enduring business is in the public markets. And I think to some degree it's a shame that there's so much friction involved with being public right now, that so many founders are choosing to stay private for longer. And it shouldn't be, when I founded Clio, it hit 50 million or 100 million of ARR, and that's the threshold where you could easily go public. That was and that just has ratcheted up over the years, where it was 300 million, now 400 million. You listen to folks, like Bill Gurley, and they say the threshold is $1 billion of ARR today. And that's obviously a vanishingly small number of companies that are ever going to hit that point. Apple went public at $20 million of revenue. So we have, I think this really toxic and negative quality associated with the public markets right now, where there's just so much cost, friction, and short-term thinking. Like, just look at SaaSpocalypse over the last 2 months. I'm very happy I'm not a public company CEO right now, because it's such an emotionally driven environment. And I think with what Alison's raised with a private market, you can time your raises, you can make sure you're bringing the right partners on board. But ideally, the problem with the current model is that ownership in companies like Clio and Jane are being concentrated in the hands of a very small pool of private equity investors, growth equity investors, mostly out of the US. And the answer to the broad population in Canada, never mind just customers, but mom and dad, your family, the broader population in Canada that wants to buy into these success stories in Canada, there's no mechanism to do that. And I think that's a real failing, and ultimately why I'd like to see the markets evolve to a point where more companies, like everyone on stage here, can eventually be public.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, interestingly, we don't think about going public. We founded our company in 2021, but we do think a lot about other companies going public and staying private. That's the core of what we do. And I think that with the machinery and infrastructure that we've built, we kind of help to solve these problems that you've raised, right? We can, investors can get liquidity for their positions, even big ones, like $50, $100 million through us, right? And I've seen companies, the companies that we trade through Hive, these are massive, globally significant companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Stripe. SpaceX, has been private for years. It's slated to go public at close to $2 trillion valuation. You can stay private and become a very, very big, very, very important company without an IPO, right? And there are also mechanisms to bring in that sort of democratization or to provide access to your customer base through the private market. OpenAI raised a pile like some massive $22 billion, I think, announced yesterday. And some $3 billion of that came from retail investors through private funds. And so there are mechanisms, and they were celebrating the fact that this was sort of this great opportunity for accredited and qualified purchasers to get access to this pure play AI and sort of the only opportunity. So there are ways to stay private, but have access to some of the features of the public markets, and that's what we get very excited about.
Yeah, I like to make fun of it, Luke, because you said you've told me you never want to run a public company, but you also once told me that you don't want to raise outside capital, and then the company did actually bring on a private equity owner. So is it never say never, or is it never say, or is it maybe not now?
Yeah, look, it's maybe not now. I think everything, I don't want to reiterate what the panelists said. I think I agree with pretty much everything you said. there's a tax that you have to pay to be public, and as long as you can raise money at extraordinarily high valuations in the private market, it allows the operators to really focus on the long-term enduring success of the business, as opposed to having to make decisions that are based on monthly, quarterly results. Like at the end of the day, I think everyone here is on the same journey, which is, we didn't sell the organization when it was smaller because we see this monster opportunity ahead of us, and everything you can do as a operator to focus on that big picture, long-term opportunity is going to create substantial more value for everyone involved. And with regards to liquidity, I do agree. There's other alternatives. So there's no real need. Now you get to a threshold where you have to. Like at some point, the private funding markets, they're just not available to reach the valuations that you have. And so at that point, I guess never say never.
Now, and I mean, you've got private capital investors, so you didn't put up your hand when asked about the IPO, but it's at some point they're going to want to exit because they're in, sort of time-limited funds. So, I mean, what is that? If it's not an IPO, what does that kind of next chapter look like?
So, I'm not I wouldn't say no to anything, but it wouldn't be my first choice option. So, I am aware that an IPO is a tool, and a tool that any scaled company should use. But I do see it as quickly becoming one of the weakest tools because of the distraction. And I also think there was another argument that was given a lot to me in the past, which is that being a public company allowed you to bring in better talent because it could help your employees realize the value of their shares. But I think that a lot of us entrepreneurs have found other ways to mitigate those risks by having small rounds and letting employees participate and lots of other bonusing schemes. So yeah, I mean, of course, I will have shareholders change over time. I'm sure all of us will. But I think focusing on our mission as the most critical thing, building a company that is scaling at an impressive rate is also our top priority. And by accomplishing that, I think it should allow these private investors or investors that want to invest in private companies that aren't looking to promise an IPO date to be interested in what you're doing. And then I think the other key focus area to be an attractive company to buy is that you are hyper-focused on solving a unique problem that others, there's less competitive companies in those markets.
Okay, thanks. Let's talk about AI. For each of you, I'm curious to know, is AI an extinction level event, the SaaS apocalypse as you talked about, or a big opportunity? Has it given your customers the tools to do things themselves that could threaten your relationship or revenue potential? I want to hear about that and also how you're using AI. Alison, maybe you could start us off on that one, because I know we talked about scripts last year as something that kind of popped up. I think that AI was suddenly bringing to the table, I guess.
About what, sorry? Scripts?
Scripts, yeah, the script writing software.
I talked to you about this like a year ago, and you were just like, shut up about AI. And I was like, it's going to be the big, we can't not talk about it. I think it's super exciting. Our end market of healthcare is obviously not going away with AI. Their jobs aren't being replaced. I think every industry has a completely different way that they have to approach this. So is it an extinction level threat? It is for sure for every technology company if you don't accept that it's the new world. It's like if you didn't accept that the internet was invented and you just kept going, it doesn't matter what your end user is, you're going to fail in that competition eventually. So for us, we're approaching it in several ways, but every time I open LinkedIn right now, all it says is SaaS is dead, SaaS is dead, SaaS is dead. And I'm like, what does that even mean? SaaS is just a way that you charge for your software. How can that be dead? I don't understand. But I think software as a service is actually just becoming a promise now, where software is a service. So what we can do is instead of selling tools to our small business customers, we can actually sell the outcome to them. which is kind of an amazing thing for these small business owners. So we used to say, see Jane chart, see Jane bill, like see Jane run your practice. It was part of our branding. But now we're like, see Jane actually run your practice. Like, how amazing is that? So we still had to build all this, like we're in a really great position having built all the tools. And then you can layer AI on top as an operator of those tools. This is like a whole new world. And I think actually a lot of our companies are really well positioned because we've built a successful like base on which to operate that. But if you don't reshift, like shift the way you're thinking about everything to do with technology and imagine a future that's 3 years out and what that actually is going to look like, then you're never going to survive the transition. So and then internally, the way you operate your team also, I think we can do smaller teams, but we can do less admin busy work, more human work. I think human in the age of AI is also a huge differentiator. How do you bring your human connection and relationships to the, how can we spend more time with that? People are going to become desperate for it as we have more and more bot interaction, I guess, in the world. So yeah, I would say you can't not be talking about this every second. Like every breath within your company right now should be transforming your product, transforming your company, all with AI at the root.
Do you want to go next to Luke?
Yeah, just I think this is more from a software lens perspective. So if you're an entrepreneur here and whatnot, I think every software CEO should have like a really healthy dose of paranoia right now. The way and it's different for everyone for sure, but the way people are working is going to be dramatically different in some way, shape, or form, which transforms the landscape of our end customers, which means the business models that we're working on today are disruptible. And we're never going to be able to out-innovate the mass amounts of funding that are going into the foundation models, and they're going to eat into the value proposition that we're actually creating. So we have to constantly be, I think, high alert, high paranoia, whether it's actually existential threat or not, because there's just so much change coming down the pipe in such a short period of time. I think ultimately, most of us are actually well structured. We're thinking about this stuff. We're well invested. We're going to benefit from this. But if there's a little bit of complacency, you can get destroyed, I think.
Anyone want to jump in? Some more?
Yeah, I would say for an organization like GeoComply, where we collect thousands of different data points on the billions of transactions we're having for our customers every day, you look at having a team of excellent data scientists, machine learning specialists. It's almost never enough as you scale. And I think that it's an amazing opportunity to be able to integrate AI into the performance of your technology, especially because we're not the only ones that are seeing the benefits of AI. And especially in the fraud space, one thing that criminals are great at is innovating. They are all essentially great entrepreneurs with very profitable businesses, and they're not paying tax. So they have the upper hand. And I feel like for us as an organization that works in trust and compliance, it's a very big opportunity to win and to win faster, but also to play this game of whack-a-mole at a much faster pace, which I know we are destined to. But the other thing that I would say that is critical that I believe for all SaaS companies is that if you're not an AI-first technology company, that is likely the death of any technology, because now the expectation is to deliver innovation at 11 times the pace, likely. But then how do you also get your customers to integrate and learn how to use that technology at 11 times the pace? Because we are all still humans, and many people don't like to change their daily routines. And so that is the big opportunity that I think a lot of organizations have internally.
And Jack, you define yourself now as an AI company, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think the challenge to every SaaS company out there is to invert the value proposition from software as a service to service as software. And I think what Ali pointed out around selling outcomes is exactly right. For me, one of the really transformative pieces of writing I read a couple of years ago was by Sarah Tavel from Benchmark, who talked about this idea that the transformation AI is driving is that you're selling work, not software. And I think for every software company, most software companies, most SaaS companies have an opportunity to dramatically expand their TAM and their opportunity if they execute on that opportunity to pursue delivering end work to customers rather than just being a system of record. Just 2 years ago, you could talk about being the system of record, and that would be a good thing. Today, that means you're dead in the water. If you're not figuring out how do you evolve from a system of record to a system of action that is actually executing work on your customer's behalf, your whole business model is threatened. And I think what you're seeing in the public markets right now, and even in the private markets, is investors are discounting every SaaS company with a view to them being in that latter category, the company that can't figure out how to become a system of action, a company that can't figure out how to deliver work rather than software. And maybe it's a minority of SaaS companies that do actually figure this out, but for the ones that do, I really believe it's a dramatically expanded market opportunity. For Clio, just to set the frame, our software and payments TAM is probably a $20 billion TAM, which is nothing to sneeze at. That's a big opportunity. But the legal services TAM that we're now tapping into with this AI transformation is a $1 trillion TAM. So we're seeing a 50x expansion in our opportunity thanks to evolving to an AI company. So I think as the market kind of hones in on who are these winners and losers in SaaSpocalypse, we'll start to see a very bifurcated valuation model on whether you're in the first or second category.
I want to end off with two questions rolled into one. There have been growing concerns that entrepreneurs from Canada are increasingly leaving Canada to start their companies. There's a big story we wrote about a survey by Leaders Fund last year that showed the data to back that up. Anna, you actually did the reverse. You relocated to Canada. I want to ask all of you, why did you choose to build your companies, and why did you stay? And I guess the second part of that is, to the extent that there might be politicians, policymakers listening in today, what would be your advice or your one big ask or suggestion? How can Canada continue to be or improve upon its ability to be a favorable place to build the $100 million clubs of club companies of tomorrow? Sarah, why don't you start us off?
We didn't think about starting this business anywhere else. We were raised in Canada. We were educated in Canada, and we think that living in Vancouver is pretty cool. I'd say it's probably the most beautiful place on earth to live. I'm biased, I guess. We spend weekends in the mountains. It's tough, right? The talent pool is definitely smaller, but my view on that is that it kind of helps to be, in some ways, a bigger fish in a smaller pond, right? People in Vancouver are excited about what we're doing, right? In San Francisco, we would be just another startup, and not a very successful one at that compared to everybody else out there. Whereas in Vancouver, we have a story that really resonates with people. Who come and work for us and are like super motivated by our mission and the fact that we are Canadian born and bred and that we are solving a huge global problem, that we are a Vancouver-based company solving a global problem. To your second question, oh gosh, where to start, right? We tend to keep our heads down building our company, and we don't necessarily complain too much about what's going on in the world around us. We just don't have time for that. But certainly the one thing I would say to policymakers, the one thing that sort of keeps me up at night is what I would sort of describe as interprovincial barriers to trade. That shows up for us as 13 securities regulators, provincial and territorial, across Canada. I know we've been talking probably for decades about a national securities regulator, never seem to wrap our arms around it. But for us, this just increases complexity, increases cost, not just for us, but for anyone looking to enter the space. And I think it limits opportunities for Canadians. It's much more difficult to offer our innovative investment products to Canadians than it is to our U.S. customers. And that's really, I think, unfortunate. So that's probably that barrier to interprovincial trade. And then the second thing I would say is policies that help us attract senior talent to relocate here. We need those people. we can employ them remotely. We do. That's great. But there is nothing quite like having these people in our technology ecosystems. That's how we will create the companies of tomorrow.
Look, why don't you go next?
100%. Every policy that we have is oriented around startups and entrepreneurship, but there's no actual thoughtful policy to support scale. And it's about talent. Sometimes we obsess in talent and we think about engineers only, but the real problem is there's no operators at scale. There's 70 companies that are above 100 million. I would imagine that the vast majority of the actual executives are American, not Canadian. You have to develop that talent. You have to attract and recruit that talent, and you have to retain that talent. I know 5 years ago, 90% of my executive team was Canadian. We fast forward, we've quadrupled the size of the business, and now there's like a third of the executives are Canadian. Everyone else is American. The talent doesn't exist. The worst part is some of the talent is actually Canadian, but based in the United States, and they're happy to stay there because it's a more favorable environment for them to actually thrive. Like, these are things that we have to change. You're actually penalized as a Canadian company because incentives that are there for you when you're on a startup go away as you scale. And it's like, we got to support scale as well as entrepreneurship. Otherwise, it's better to leave.
And Anna, what convinced you guys to move back to Canada and stay and build here?
My own personal lifestyle. So it was a selfish decision. I did have a couple of critical people that I had worked with in the past, and they were our early employees. So it wasn't totally out of context, but I mean, almost 100% of GeoComply's customers are based elsewhere in the world, majority in the US. I, as well, have a large pool of my leadership team that are American, because a scaled company in the US, right, isn't generally considered 100 million. They don't have conferences for $100 million mark that I've been invited to.
That's why you have to read the Globe and Mail.
Yeah, they do. I will tell them that. But, you know, Canada's a great place to live. And I think it's a place that now I'm here and I have more time and I've learned about some of Canada's challenges. I want to work closely with the government and the community to help solve some of those challenges and make it a better scaled place. I mean, we're in Vancouver. It's less than 1 million people there, right? So it's still a bit of a small town, but we have some global impact. We've seemed to have made it on this international clock with London, New York, Singapore. Vancouver's always there. I don't know how. And I think we can be heavy hitters and make that impact. But I agree, to hire an executive and get them to want to move to Vancouver, you are asking them, when you give them their equity package, to take quite a lot less, because if it is a success, they have to pay a lot to a country that they likely don't belong to and might never ever have a passport for, because that's quite a long process. So I think that becomes a tricky situation. I think it would also be very beneficial if Canada could solve that problem, but also use more of our technologies. I'm not selling a problem that Canada doesn't have. Every global country and company and government has fraud, but somehow it's the enforcement that comes in America that actually allows traction and also publicity for companies like ours. And I think that that's one of the challenges that we suffer from, and a lot of other technology companies I talk to don't have a large portion of their customers in Canada, which means when we get investors that end up taking a majority share, they want to move the company to the US where its customers are. And I can see how that makes sense.
Jack, why don't you go next?
So I think, you know, for Clio and myself, you know, I was born in Canada, and Clio's in Canada because I looked around at the talent that worked alongside me in, you know, university and the first company I worked at outside of university, and thought, this talent is as good as anyone I've met from anywhere around the world. And why can't I build this company in Canada? And then as we started to raise venture rounds for Clio, again, this was back 2008, 2009, 2010, got a lot of pressure from every investor we spoke to in those days. And I think, thankfully, it has changed. But a lot of pressure to move the company down to the valley. And we'll fund you if you move. And I think it was just stubbornness on my part and some amount of patriotism that really made me feel like, no, I'm going to show we can prove that. I'm going to prove we can build a company like Clio in in Canada. But there's always the pressure to, again, in those days, and I think it's there to an extent now, but a pressure to move south, and we countered that. But I think everyone in the panel, and including Michael in the fireside, I think everyone spoke to the fact that basically it's a happy accident that these companies are Canadian companies because they happen to be born in Canada. And the opportunity we have at Canada to be the destination of choice for founders and for knowledge workers that have more mobility than they've ever had in the history of technology. And if we execute on that, I think Canada can be, and has every right to be, one of the most prosperous countries in the world. But we need to think about the policy environment that actually encourages that. If you're a founder that is choosing to start an AI native company of any kind, how can we make Canada the place they choose to move to or to stay in, as the case might be? And that's everything from tax policy, right? We need to realize that founders are looking at the US and looking at QSBC, for example, and seeing the massive tax advantages that offers to them if they drive a great outcome, and comparing that to a much more high tax regime in Canada that we narrowly avoided making dramatically worse just a couple of years ago under the Trudeau administration. So I think we need to be thinking about how do we make those incentives such that founders want to move to Canada and realize that, when these kind of success stories happen, we're creating thousands of jobs for Canadians. And these short-term tax policies and narrow tax policies are preventing us from realizing a much larger gain. The Globe's written a lot about the productivity crisis in Canada as well, and I think we need an immigration policy that is just very narrowly focused on the question, will bringing this person into Canada help improve our productivity? And that's another crisis I think we need to solve to become competitive with the US and other markets. So I think there's a wide variety of policy changes that can reduce friction for founders in Canada. And again, make Canada, Vancouver, Toronto, all sorts of locations around Canada have amazing universities, amazing talent. They're beautiful, clean, safe cities. The Canada should be the destination of choice for the modern knowledge worker. And I think if we evolve our policies in the right way, we can realize that opportunity.
Great, thanks. Ali, last word to you.
Yeah, I'll try to be fast. I think like everyone else, we just started here. The pressure to move to the US came from, it's just an investor pressure, right? Like that's the only reason it exists, is investors were telling you should move to the US. Because we were profitable from the beginning and we didn't take investment until quite a bit later. And because Jack came before us, we never got asked that. I never got asked to move to the US. It was never a problem that we had to solve. I was never pressured to leave. So I think it's actually a good example of this messy middle we're in, though, as Canadian companies, where the talent problem, it's because we're creating the companies that now are teaching the talent locally that can then be hired into the ecosystem as other companies scale around us. But we are struggling to find that talent ourselves as we reach a certain threshold. We're also having to hire execs from the US because there's not enough companies that have seen the experience and scale. So you try to bring your own team along with you, and you scale as much as you can with your team, and then sometimes you need to go outside of that. So I agree, the policy question, there's kind of three things. One is helping us work with a distributed team, really. Like if we're going to be in Vancouver, we just don't have the local talent pool. So we have to be a distributed company, not only across Canada, but now across all of North America and globally, even more so when you start to scale globally. So how do we allow our scale-up companies to more effectively work? Like even compensation is a challenge, and bringing people in if they want to. There is an appetite to come up to Canada, but it's not exactly simple. And then the second part is that global. As a Canadian company, if you want to scale, you have to be export minded. You can't. Simple is arguing that you don't, but I do. At some point, you do have to be export minded. I think it's one of the cool things about being a Canadian company is that you don't get tricked into thinking that your local market is big enough, which we see that happen in the US a lot. People don't think about exporting globally and then it's really hard to do because they haven't really factored that into their planning. And so exporting, when we're at scale, there's a lot of help for exporting if you're a very small company, but if you've already scaled in North America, you are no longer, you don't qualify anymore. So if we want to export into the UK, into Australia, we want to send people, and there's no help for that because we're too many people or too high of a revenue. But I'm like, but our revenue there should qualify us. Like, what is our revenue actually on the ground in that country? And so you don't have access to all of that help when you're a certain scale. So those are the 3 places that I think we could get help. But we're doing the work. We're building an ecosystem in Canada. It's going to get better for all the future companies because we're scaling the talent, and your list is scaling the talent. And this was your whole thesis. Was we need many, many more $100 million companies, not like $1 or $2 billion companies, like as revenue-wise. And I think you're right.
I'm just writing what I see. We have to leave it there. But for those in the in-room audience, we'll have a networking reception following the program, so you'll have an opportunity to chat with some of the panelists shortly. But for now, for our final segment, I'll invite back April. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sean, and a big thank you to Alok, Sarah, Jack, Anna, and Allison for that excellent discussion. We just heard from CEOs and founders themselves on what it takes to become scale-ups like those. What does a blueprint for success look like? To answer that question, we'll hear from experts who advise entrepreneurs on growing and who help pave the way for that growth. Let's introduce them. First, we have Sid Paquette, head of RBCX. Oh, sorry, let me start that again. First, we have Mark Noonan, Vice Chair and Executive Sponsor of Canada's Technology Fast 50 program with Deloitte Canada. And next, I'm delighted to introduce Sid Paquette, Head of RBCX. And last but not least, from Mars Discovery District, we have CEO Grace Lee Reynolds. I thought we'd start by setting the stage and assess how our $100 million tech club landscape is actually. Grace, at a high level, how is Canada actually doing when it comes to producing companies of this scale? And from where you sit, where do you think are the biggest gaps to making sure that this becomes more common, that we build on this momentum?
Thanks, April. I think the last 2 panels actually, you heard a lot of the continuity of where Canada is right now. Great startup scene. We have really kind of boosted that ecosystem to be able to support early stage companies. But you heard it from a scaling perspective. It is really difficult to scale. And you heard very specifically about the challenges that we see all the time from the earlier panel, which is how do you find that type of very particular capital to help you build and scale to the next level? How do you find customers, right? Real customers that will help you partner and develop your product further. And then furthermore, it's talent. Canada has such a wealth of talent, but it's that question about really experienced talent to those operators who have had the experience to scale a company. That's what's missing. That's what we see.
Sid, what are your thoughts on that? Where do you see the biggest gaps, and how are we doing in terms of the landscape for being able to produce $100 million companies?
Thank you, and thanks everybody for having me. First and foremost, just as we kind of talk about gaps before I get into the gaps, we're doing some really, really good things, right? If you look around this room, this is like the who's who in Canadian tech in Canada today. Now, I would personally, I want to see this room 100 times bigger. We will get there. So we're doing a lot of things really, really well, right? And we've heard about talent. Do we have all the talent we need in Canada? No, we don't. Do we have people who have been where we're all going? We do not. And so people will struggle with this. We're going to have to get external talent. We're going to have to do some of these things. But we're doing a lot of really, really, really good things. We've just got to do it at scale now. As an ecosystem, we're not scaled. right? So we are not a scaled ecosystem. This is not, like, don't compare us to the Valley. We don't have that sort of scale. So we just got to get really, really smart about hacking it, right? We've got to hack it. So there's a lot of things that we can do to hack it. You know, we'll probably talk about what we can do from a government perspective later, and some other things, but we've got to hack scale a little bit, right? No different than what all of the companies here have done. I do think there's a huge opportunity. I'm super excited about it, but we absolutely do have gaps that we've got to think through very thoughtfully.
So I'm just going to point out two things. I love that, hacking the scale, but also you all just got a shout out. You are the who's who of the tech community, so give yourselves a pat on the back. Mark, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, first and foremost, I think we heard from the speakers that came up here earlier today, like, very crystal clear the problem they're solving and the size of the market they're after. I mean, that is really what it takes to scale. If you can explain the problem you're solving and it's scalable, you know, you'll be able to get the momentum. I would say that, you know, the health of the ecosystem, we do that, Deloitte does Technology Fast 50, and this year, our growth rate of the 50 technology companies is the fastest growth rate in the last 21 years since the inception of the program. So we've got a lot of companies that are getting significant growth at that stage. And so how do we then evolve to the next level to help those companies scale? And I think you've heard some of the conversations today. I think we're probably going to get into some of it about how to scale and where do you get that talent to scale? How do you get that go-to-market discipline and really grow up as a company, you know, from a founder perspective. So yeah, look forward to that too.
So you've been through a time, you've been in the tech space for a long time, but you've also seen a time when capital was very scarce, pretty much non-existent for tech. In Canada, the landscape has changed drastically. Has access to capital actually become less of a bottleneck for Canadian tech firms, or is it just a different one?
Yeah, so I'm going to probably say a lot of things here that are against popular opinion. So I actually in Canada, do we have a capital problem? We do, right? But the best firms are always going to find capital, right? So they absolutely will get there. Are there things that we can do at the early stage? Absolutely. Like our seed funds, are they comparatively close to what the US size of seed funds are? Absolutely not even close. So could we do things there? Absolutely. From a growth stage perspective, do we have domestic investors that do a lot of growth stage? We don't, right? So if you were to take a look at the top 20 growth stage companies, so a lot of the folks here who are on the list and who were here earlier, if you take the top 20 growth stage companies in this country and you look at their cap tables and you look at who led their deals, if you look at the early stage to mid stage, 70% of those deals are led by Canadian investors. When you look at it and you look at their late stage deals, well, that flips to 20%. Right? So there's just, and that's from a domestic capital perspective. So they've got external capital, they're not struggling to get capital, but there's no domestic capital. And so that's a problem for us, right? Because every single person in this room, I'm assuming everyone here is a taxpayer, we've funded virtually every single tech company in this country. Because almost every single one of them starts, and they start with shred financing, which is funded by all of us. And so at the highest risk stage, we fund all of these companies. And then what happens? Well, these companies do amazing things, and we don't provide a lot of support for them. They do amazing things. They grow into amazing companies, like all the companies we just saw on stage. And then we kind of fade to black, right? As a country, we fade into the sunset. And we're not there to help them get to the next level. We don't have the capital. We don't have the skill sets. We don't have a lot of these things. But I think it's more than just capital, though, right? Like, because people say, oh, they lament, oh, there's no capital, there's no capital. And what I would say is, you know, I used to use my kids as this example. I won't do that. But if I was to give $100,000 to an inexperienced fund manager, or I give $10 million to that inexperienced fund manager, the only difference between those two scenarios is I've lost more money. Right? So we've got to do something more than just capital. It's not like you give somebody more capital, it doesn't make them successful. So what makes them successful? Well, can we do training programs for them? We have really, really good GPs in this country. Can we leverage something there to train up the next generation, right? And then give them capital and start building it. And so when I say about like hacking scale, like these are some of the things that we can do that aren't terribly difficult to do, but we've just got to get concerted on it because it's not capital, right? Like we can dump so much more capital into inexperienced fund managers. They're going to make really crummy deals, and they're not going to help the companies that they invest in. They're not going to add value. They're not going to do all of these other things. So how do we hack it, right? And so how do we bring up that next generation of fund manager, that next generation of entrepreneur? Like, how do we pull systems and platforms and training around those individuals to make them successful? And that's something that we don't do a lot of today, and we've got to get a lot better on the support system around.
Some more connectivity, and I think will be a big theme as we
I think
go on in our
I think it's more
discussion.
than connectivity. Like, I think we've got to be concerted, and we've got to be aggressive about it. This isn't about networking, more networking events for people. This is literally like, let's take the best of the best that we have in this country, which we have lots of them, and let's give them the training, right? Let's actually train them. Let's take the time, the effort. It's a longer term horizon, but if you look out 5-10 years from now, if we were to do that today, this would be a very different ecosystem that we would be living in.
That's a great rallying cry. Mark, as a tax partner, you've been part of the tech space for since before the dot-com bubble, and you've watched hundreds of companies grow up close with Fast 50. What do you think separates companies that stall from the ones that break through, and make it into the $100 million tech club?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Good question, and Sid makes some great points about really upskilling our people and our talent that we have. But what we see with the various companies that we work with, and the number that are there, is you get founder mentality. So our founders, and many in this room, are very scrappy. They learn to do more with less, and because we have less money, they work extra hard, 24/7 many times, and are very, very customer focused, and they'll be talking to customers all the time, and they'll be going through iterations of their product and their offering, and many times listening and iterating to meet clients' needs, to meet customers' needs, because getting that traction, getting that money in the door is very important. We'll see some companies get into a bit of professional services to get some revenue in the door to really create those companies. But then to get to that next level, what we see is, it's the old saying, you've got to, stop working in the business and start working on the business. And so how do our founders transition to do that and build teams, build that go-to-market scalability, and really looking at professionalizing the go-to-market function, as well as getting some real discipline and understanding where they're investing money. So like professionalizing their finance function. So $1 invested in marketing produces what? How much does it cost to attain a client or a customer? What's your stickiness? And how do you build that in a repeatable manner with the financing that you have? And so we see, like I said, we've got an incredible group of Fast 50 companies that are growing very quickly, and it's how to get them to scale at that level.
We heard this on our previous panel. Sean mentioned how the critics have been sounding the alarm on how we're actually losing earlier stage startups in Canada, that entrepreneurs are looking to build elsewhere. Are you seeing that from where you sit at Mars, Grace? And if so, what's the organization looking to do to address it?
Oh my goodness, at the earlier stages right now. So it's not necessarily just scaling companies, but those early stage companies seeking their first check for seed funding. There are opportunities in the US. I think, investors in the South, they certainly understand the talent and the capability, so much of it built on particular sectors where Canada has a lot of strength then. So it's not just generally around software, but if you think about AI and how it gets applied into health and clean tech solutions as an example, a lot of eyes are on that. What are we doing? We're trying to wrap around as much as possible, right? Trying to be able to signal that you can just as well be able to create your opportunity here. There are advantages when you think about some of the tax tools, for instance, right, being a CCPC, but it's not quite enough. And this is where, as an ecosystem, it's so important that we continue to come together and look at that larger holistic way of trying to make things sticky for us, sticky for those earliest stage companies to stay here.
Another thing that I know that you're concerned about is that capital is important, but not having the customers and the sales is also really important. And in Canada, what do you think is missing between a strong product and meaningful commercial traction?
Strong product. Yeah. So this is that, it's great to have capital, but you can't grow your business unless you actually have sales and revenue, of course, right? And how do you create that opportunity from the front end? One thing for sure is that companies at their earliest onset, we counsel, and they know as well, you can't grow strictly in the Canadian market. You have to think globally from day one. That's one aspect of it too. The other thing too is that a lot of these companies, they need partners to be able to help them with that first pilot, for instance, getting that confidence so that their product can be validated. Government isn't the entire solution, of course. Corporates can step in as well, but Canada, the government, they are the largest buyer in Canada itself. So there are definitely intentional tools that can be looked at, we feel, that can help in this regard.
Sid, what are your thoughts on procurement? What role does government have to play?
You can see my...
I saw a reaction.
Saw a vein pop up on my head. So I don't disagree. I think government has a role to play. I absolutely do. And I think government has a role to play in procurement. I think it's much broader than government though, right? Like if we think about government and procurement, like in a lot of cases, we have more than one tech leader in the exact same industry, in the exact same field in this country. Government's not going to procure from both of them. So one of them will be a loser, right? So we've got to think about broadening. So yes, government needs to procure. There is no doubt about it. We've got to open up that opportunity. We've got to have Canadian companies at the table every single time there's an RFP, and we have that capability in Canada, for sure, right? They need to be at the bake-off. But we've got to go broader than that. Like to me, it's broader than government. We've got to get big corporates doing the exact same thing. How do we get leaders of all sizes of organization to think, again, this isn't by Canada, but this is like, if we've got something here in Canada, like they should be part of our process de facto. And this is for everybody. And I think if all we do is rely on government, we're going to have a really big problem in this country. We've got to expand that to big corporates. We got to expand that to mid corporates. It's not easy to do, and I don't have the answer on how we're going to do it other than individually for leaders who are in these spaces. You got to just step up. You got to think about Canada. You got to recognize that we have this capability in this country. And so take a look, open your eyes. You don't have to think about who spent the most marketing in the US to market their product. Look and see if we've got that capability here in this country. And if we do, make sure they're at the table, right? Doesn't mean that you have to pick the Canadian company over a foreign company. Absolutely not what I'm saying. But they need to be at the bake-off, right? Like to me, we need to be looking at them. And again, there's a lot of benefit to even if you lose one of those bake-offs. You learn a lot, you get feedback, you iterate on your product, and you can go at it again. If they're not even at the table, we're doing a massive disservice to our country.
Mark, what are your thoughts on that? How do we get, all of, not just Canadian government, but other players in business to answer Sid's call?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really all about championing it and communicating it, and this is a great platform to do it. And obviously, the Globe is a great platform to do it. And each of us has a responsibility, I think, to undertake that, especially in business and where we're going. There's and then there's a responsibility for the companies to really understand where those buckets of money are. I mean, there's an incredible amount of capital going to be spent in the defense industry. So I've got a number of clients now trying to rethink their strategy. They may be in security, they may be in certain aspects of technology to see what the application is to defense is, because it's a transformational time to be in that sector. And so really trying to understand what the size of your market is, where I go back to, what is scalable and where can you develop from. If you look at a lot of the development that has gone on in the US, a lot of it happened out of the defense industry. So there is a massive amount of tech that can come out and innovation that can come out of defense. And I think this is a unbelievable time for a Canadian company to be in that space.
It's an important role for policy, right? Turning to the ecosystem and connectivity and leadership, Grace, we hear a lot about Silicon Valley and the draw of Kendall Square. What does Canada still lack in terms of tech ecosystem density? Can it be built intentionally, or is it just going to come up organically? What do you think?
I think I think we have to treat it with intention, right? And I think it's also very much, it's a long-term view and a long-term vision, I think, right? It does come down to culture. That doesn't change overnight. We heard a little bit about different types of ideas that we can kind of tweak, but I think, the idea then is if we can start to kind of develop that, and that isn't just about a tech ecosystem, that goes even broader in terms of what your civic environment is as well, right? But the more we can kind of grow that then, and as soon as that reaches just a little bit of a mass, right, all those concerns about the risk of trying to find the right type of talent start to diminish.
Sid, you've said that one of your concerns is that Canada still has this fear of failure. How does it show up in things like boardrooms, hiring decisions, product innovation, and not just founder psychology?
That's a good question. So I don't know if it necessarily shows up in boardrooms necessarily. The fear of failure for me is, I think this is great. We're all here, as an example, we're all here, but what are we celebrating, right? We're celebrating the success of the very few that have managed to scale in Canada without any sort of support, right? That's what we're here to do. What we don't do very well is we're not I would challenge anyone here, does anybody know about, Jack's most challenging times when he was building Clio, or Michael's most challenging times when he was building Wealthsimple, or Mike's most challenging times when he was building League? The list goes on, right? Ali, et cetera. And the answer is we don't know those stories, right? And definitely not as an industry. We don't celebrate it enough, which means we don't learn from it. And I don't believe that success, is built off of the shoulders of success, right? Success is built off of the shoulders of failure. But you need to know what that failure is so we don't repeat the mistakes. We can learn from the people who have been there, ground through it, persevered. And that, to me, is how we enable the ecosystem. So is it showing up in boardrooms? No, not really, because, entrepreneurs they're resilient, right? And they as a class are not afraid of failure. But I just think we have to get to the point where we're wearing failure as a badge of honor. I can tell you, I have failed way more times than I've succeeded, right? And that's where I learn. And that's where every single person in this room, you will learn from your failures, not your successes. And so we just have to, I think, just invert that a little bit. And we all do it. And I've done it. I've hired people. I'm oh yeah, they started a company, but they didn't do very well. And I'm always fighting, going, okay, well, they didn't build a scaled company. It's okay, but they would have learned a lot about the failure that they had. And so, I'm just cognizant about pushing back on some of those biases that I have. And I think we just have to start celebrating those things.
Yeah, it's another form of training, as you put it earlier.
It is, yeah. And let's learn from each other. We've got amazing people in this country. Yeah.
Mars was an early investor in Stack Adapt, which was recently valued at $2.5 billion in its latest financing. With a profitable investment like that, how much does that actually change the math for the next generation of startups? Does that big win for Mars create a ripple effect for the ecosystem, for the fund?
Well, I think from financially, it'll create a wonderful ripple system to, I think, investors, right? All the investors that had made that bet there, and to this point around a flywheel, around an ecosystem, I think the thing is if as part of the ecosystem see fit to be able to reinvest, right? Whether it's financially, whether through its time, that's the real win, right? All of these stories, being able to talk about and convening communities, for us to come together and just being able to hold hands around the idea of the opportunities, that's really kind of the key as well.
When it comes to boards and investors in Canada, Mark, from your perspective, do we genuinely reward ambition, staying here, building here, or do we subtly encourage companies to sell maybe too early?
Yeah, well, that actually gets back a little bit to Sid's point on failure. And so what is failure? Is failure trying to go big and then going bankrupt, or is failure stalling out, right? And maybe selling too early? And maybe is that a vision of failure? And I'd say that it is something that quite often people will sell too early in Canada, and investors will be motivated to have an exit, and will look to monetize on that. It is interesting, and you heard a little bit from the previous panel. The amount of private capital right now is, I think, starting to take that away. And I think you're seeing, if you have a good business, I think you're seeing new private capital willing to step up and continue on that business. In fact, I have a client right now going through, it's been owned by a private equity, and they're doing a follow-on round, and they're only looking at financial investors, which is fantastic. Like, that is a true Canadian success story, because they want to continue, the management team wants to continue the business on to grow it for Canada and to grow it for their employees and their individual shareholders, but the private equity wants out because they've been in for a number of years. So I think we're seeing more opportunity for companies to stay Canadian and not sell out, and provide some liquidity along the way. So it's a good discussion that's being had at the board level and the management level.
It's an interesting example. Sid?
Sorry, can I jump in on that? Sorry, and I'm going to make this a little bit spicy, because I totally disagree, and I'll tell you why. Like, I think we talk about, like, selling out too early. Like, who the hell are we to tell somebody else they've sold out too early? We're not in the business. We're not looking at it. Sure, you sold your business for $10 million. You know what? Management may have looked at that and went, holy crap, this business is like 10 million. This is all I'm ever going to get for this. I need to sell. Like, I hear this a lot of, like, oh my God, you sold too early. You sold too early. It's like, really? Like, I'm not in the business. You are. You've made that decision. In some cases, I agree with you. Back in the day, when you never allowed secondaries and people had mortgages, are they taking big risks? Probably not, right? Like, some do, but they're outliers. But, like, that world's changed, right? That world changed 15, 20 years ago. And so now, like, I hear you, and you're saying what lots of other people say. It's just like, really? Like,
I would just say, if it's management's decision, for sure. But if it's the investor's decision that are saying we want an exit transaction, and they drag management along, that's what I and the question is, are we seeing that in the boards or not? I'm seeing less of that than I used to see, I guess. I used to see that more when we had our venture capitalists and there weren't those big pools of private money there. I'm just seeing less of it now, I think.
I mean, investors don't usually control the asset in venture capital, and so it's hard for investors to drag people along. Again, 15 years ago, there were different terms and conditions that enabled some of that stuff to happen, so you see a lot less of that. I don't disagree with you if there's investors pushing it, but the reality is, like, if you went and got external capital, I assure you, external capital, all they've done is they've borrowed money to invest in your business. And so at some point, they got to return that money, right? Because it's not theirs. And so, like, every person who takes that capital needs to understand that at some point, somebody's going to have an exit, right? Ali talked about it in terms of, investors, et cetera. So, like, I kind of go, it comes with the territory.
We do love a bit of spice on this stage, though.
Sorry, so I try to.
I love it. We are running out of time, and I want to end with some final thoughts. The three of you are experts in advising some of Canada's most successful tech ventures. Can you each give the leaders in this room a call to action on the one thing that they should do tomorrow to put their companies or the tech ecosystem on the path to the $100 million club and helping to expand it? Mark, let's start with you.
Sure, I would say really focusing on your go-to-market strategy and figuring out how to scale your go-to-market strategy and figure out where you need to go. And in this world of disruption with AI, I think a lot of early-stage companies are in a pretty good position with that to set that pricing strategy. You'll see more mature companies having to go backwards. I think it's an opportune time to come out with that more pricing strategy for the times.
Sid?
I am not an expert on advising companies, and if I had the answer, then, like, we wouldn't even be in this room, because all of you would be out building billion-dollar companies. So there is no silver bullet, just know that. Every company is different. Is there a commonality? Yeah, probably. Like, I think one of them, if I had to give one, but there's going to be 1,000 of them, so just add this to the list of 1,000. Is as you scale, it's very, very difficult to scale a business if, as a CEO, you're a micromanager of that business. You're not going to attract the right talent, because nobody wants to work, like, top talent does not want to be micromanaged. and you're just not going to be able to scale yourself, right? And if you can't scale yourself, you're not going to be able to scale a business. And so that is just like one piece of the puzzle, but there is no silver bullet.
Grace?
I also agree, no silver bullet, and I also agree with Mark in that focus on getting your customers and get everyone around you helping with finding your customers.
Okay, some great advice and non-advice there. Focus on your go-to-market strategy. Don't be a micromanager, and focus on your customers. Thank you so much for this really interesting discussion. We have to leave it there. And now I'll hand it back to my colleague Sean to close out our event.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, April, Grace, Sid, and Mark for a very informative panel. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would like to thank RBCX, Deloitte, and Mars for making today's event possible. Along with Canaccord Genuity, we really appreciate your support and partnership. I also want to thank everyone in our live and virtual audiences for joining us today. We'll send a recording of today's event to everyone who registered to attend or viewed the event. And some news, great news. Response to today's $100 million club event has been so positive already that we're happy to announce that we're going to do another one. Next March 31st, 2027, mark the date on your calendars. Thanks. On your screen, you'll see a QR code. Please scan it and complete our brief survey so that we can continue to improve your experience with Globe and Mail events or to suggest topics for future events. And let us know what you thought of this one. This was our first shot at this. We're doing it again, so tell us what you liked, tell us what you didn't like, tell us what you'd like to see or not see. Now I want to invite those of us in our live audience to stay and have a drink and some refreshments and enjoy some networking. Thanks, everyone.